The winter of 1776 was supposed to be the final chapter of American independence. Not the triumphant ending the colonists had dreamed of, but a brutal, frozen conclusion written in blood and desperation. Picture this: thousands of Continental soldiers, barefoot and starving, leaving crimson trails in the snow as they retreated across New Jersey. Their revolution was collapsing, their dream of liberty suffocating under the weight of military reality. But what if I told you that in those darkest moments, when defeat seemed inevitable, a single covert operation would change everything? A mission so audacious, so precisely executed, that it would resurrect a dying cause and alter the course of world history. This is the untold story of the secret intelligence gathering that made Washington's most famous gamble possible. December 1776. The Continental Army was in full retreat. British forces, supported by their feared Hessian mercenaries, had systematically dismantled American resistance across the mid-Atlantic. These weren't just any soldiers pursuing Washington's ragged forces. The Hessians were Europe's most disciplined fighting machine, professional warriors who had crushed rebellions across the continent. Their reputation alone was enough to scatter colonial militias. General George Washington faced an impossible situation. His army was disintegrating daily through desertion, disease, and despair. Enlistments were expiring at year's end, meaning most of his remaining troops would legally abandon the cause within weeks. The Delaware River represented more than a geographic barrier. It was the last line between organized American resistance and complete capitulation, yet Washington understood something his enemies did not. Wars are not won solely through superior firepower or larger armies. They are won through information, timing, and the courage to act when logic suggests surrender. In this moment of supreme crisis, he authorized a reconnaissance mission that would prove more valuable than any battlefield victory. Enter the world of Revolutionary War espionage, where ordinary citizens became extraordinary agents. This was not the glamorous spycraft of modern imagination, but desperate intelligence gathering by farmers, merchants, and craftsmen who risked execution for their beliefs. These amateur agents operated without training, sophisticated equipment, or backup plans. Their only tools were quick wits, local knowledge, and unshakable conviction. The target of this crucial mission was Trenton, New Jersey. The town had been transformed into a Hessian stronghold, its streets patrolled by soldiers who viewed the American rebellion with barely concealed contempt. These professional warriors had good reason for their confidence. They had never lost a winter engagement, their discipline was legendary, and they were commanded by officers who considered colonial fighters little more than armed peasants. But confidence can become complacency, and complacency creates vulnerability. The Hessian garrison at Trenton was settling into comfortable winter quarters, celebrating the approaching Christmas season, with the certainty that no rational enemy would attempt military operations in such brutal weather. Their commander dismissed intelligence warnings about American troop movements, believing Washington's defeated army posed no immediate threat. This miscalculation would prove catastrophic, but only because American agents were already moving through the shadows, gathering the precise intelligence Washington needed for his desperate gambit. These spies operated under conditions that would challenge modern special forces. They had to penetrate enemy-held territory without radio communication, satellite surveillance, or extraction plans. Detection meant immediate execution, yet they pressed forward. The intelligence operation required extraordinary coordination. Agents had to infiltrate Trenton, observe Hessian defenses, assess troop strength and disposition, then somehow communicate their findings back to Washington's headquarters. All of this had to be accomplished while maintaining their cover identities and avoiding the numerous patrols that swept the countryside for American sympathizers. What these agents discovered would transform Washington's understanding of the tactical situation. The Hessian garrison, despite its fearsome reputation, had grown predictably comfortable in their winter quarters. Their patrols had become routine, their defensive preparations minimal, and their attention focused more on holiday celebrations than military vigilance. Most critically, The northern approaches to Trenton remained poorly defended, creating a potential avenue of attack that the enemy had not adequately protected. This intelligence was precisely what Washington needed to hear, yet it presented him with an agonizing dilemma. The information suggested that a surprise attack on Trenton might succeed, but attempting such an operation would require crossing an ice-choked river in the middle of winter with an army that was already on the verge of collapse. Failure would not simply mean military defeat, it would mean the complete annihilation of organized American resistance. The weather itself seemed to conspire against any military operation. A fierce northeaster was building, bringing freezing rain, sleet, and snow that would make river crossing nearly impossible. Yet Washington recognized that this same storm could provide the perfect cover for his audacious plan. If his forces could somehow navigate the treacherous Delaware under cover of darkness and weather, they might achieve complete tactical surprise. The decision to proceed required faith that bordered on madness. Washington was gambling everything on intelligence gathered by amateur agents, weather conditions that could kill his army before it reached the enemy, and the desperate courage of soldiers who had already endured more hardship than any military force should be expected to bear. But this was precisely the kind of calculated risk that separates legendary commanders from merely competent ones. Washington understood that conventional military wisdom would counsel retreat, consolidation, and patience. However, his strategic situation allowed for none of these luxuries. His army was dissolving, his cause was dying, and traditional approaches had already failed. The secret intelligence operation had revealed a narrow window of opportunity, but exploiting that opportunity would require executing one of the most daring military maneuvers in American history. Everything depended on the accuracy of information gathered by agents whose names history would never remember, whose courage would never be publicly celebrated, and whose sacrifice would remain forever hidden in the shadows of classified operations. As Washington studied the intelligence reports in his headquarters tent, he knew he was looking at more than tactical information. He was examining the foundation upon which American independence might be built, or the evidence of its final, inevitable collapse. The fate of a revolution hung in the balance, suspended between the desperate courage of amateur spies and the professional competence of Europe's finest soldiers. The decision had been made. The crossing would proceed. But first, Washington needed to ensure that his forces could reach the Delaware River without detection, organize the complex logistics of a night river crossing, and maintain operational security that would prevent the Hessians from learning of his approach. The logistics of what Washington was attempting defied every principle of winter warfare. Moving 2,400 men, 18 cannons, and dozens of horses across a frozen river in the middle of a blizzard was not military strategy. It was controlled insanity, yet the intelligence his agents had gathered made one thing crystal clear. If they could achieve surprise, the Hessians were vulnerable. The weather that night became both enemy and ally. Howling winds masked the sound of preparations along the riverbank. Freezing rain turned to sleet, then to driving snow that would blind any enemy sentries foolish enough to venture outside their warm quarters. Nature itself seemed to conspire in favor of the desperate Americans, providing a white curtain behind which they could stage their impossible crossing. Colonel John Glover's Marblehead Regiment took charge of the boats. These were not soldiers in the traditional sense, but Massachusetts fishermen who understood water, ice, and the temperamental moods of winter storms. They had spent their lives battling the North Atlantic, and now their maritime expertise would serve a cause far greater than any fishing expedition. Without these men, Washington's plan would have died on the Pennsylvania shore. The Durham boats were massive, flat-bottomed vessels designed for hauling iron ore, not transporting armies through ice-filled waters. Each boat stretched 40 to 60 feet in length, capable of carrying 15 tons of cargo. Tonight, that cargo would be freezing soldiers, nervous horses, and artillery pieces that represented the last hope of American independence, loading these unwieldy craft in darkness, while ice floes threatened to crush their hulls, required seamless coordination and nerves of steel. Washington himself crossed early. establishing a beachhead on the New Jersey shore. Standing in the swirling snow, he became a living symbol of determination for his men. Every subsequent boat that fought its way across the Delaware carried soldiers who could see their commander waiting for them, refusing to retreat to warmth and safety. His presence transformed what could have been a chaotic disaster into an organized miracle. The crossing took far longer than anticipated. Ice chunks the size of small buildings drifted downstream, threatening to smash the wooden boats to splinters. Men struggled with long poles to push away these frozen battering rams, while others fought to keep their muskets and powder dry. The bitter cold numbed hands and feet, making every movement clumsy and painful. Yet somehow, boat after boat made the treacherous journey. Hours passed. The original timeline called for the army to be across and marching by midnight, allowing several hours of darkness to approach Trenton undetected. Instead, they found themselves 3 hours behind schedule, with dawn approaching and their element of surprise evaporating with each passing minute. Some officers urged Washington to abandon the mission, to accept that conditions had made success impossible. But Washington understood what his subordinates could not grasp. There was no retreat from this position. His army was now committed, stranded on hostile territory, with a treacherous river at their backs. Advancing toward Trenton was dangerous, but attempting to recross the Delaware in daylight would be suicidal. The only path to survival led forward, through 9 miles of frozen New Jersey countryside, toward a confrontation with Europe's most professional soldiers. The march to Trenton began in the pre-dawn darkness. Men who had spent hours fighting ice and current now faced an even greater challenge. The storm intensified as they moved inland, driving snow and sleet that cut through their inadequate clothing like frozen daggers. Many soldiers lacked proper footwear, leaving bloody tracks in the snow that marked their passage like a crimson trail of sacrifice. This was no longer an army in any conventional sense. These were ghosts, shadows of men held together by nothing more substantial than shared desperation and flickering hope. They marched in columns that stretched for miles, their breath forming ice crystals in the bitter air, their weapons becoming heavier with each step. Yet they continued forward, driven by the knowledge that turning back meant certain destruction. Washington rode among his men, sharing their suffering, refusing the warmth of a carriage or the comfort of dry clothing. His officers watched him closely, drawing strength from his unwavering resolve. When soldiers stumbled from exhaustion, their comrades helped them to their feet. When men whispered of the impossibility of their situation, sergeants reminded them that impossibility had never stopped Americans before. The intelligence gathered by those nameless agents proved accurate with each mile they covered. The roads remained unguarded, the countryside empty of enemy patrols. The Hessians, confident in their security and comfortable in their winter quarters, had no idea that death was marching toward them through the storm. Their professional competence, which had served them so well in conventional warfare, had not prepared them for an enemy insane enough to attack in such conditions. As the American columns approached Trenton's outskirts, the storm began to subside. A pale dawn struggled through the clouds, revealing a town still wrapped in peaceful slumber. Smoke rose from chimneys where Hessian soldiers enjoyed the warmth their enemies had been denied. The contrast was stark and bitter. Comfortable invaders sleeping soundly, while desperate patriots prepared to fight for their homeland's survival. The moment of truth had arrived. Months of retreat, weeks of intelligence gathering, hours of river crossing, and miles of frozen march had all led to this single point in time. Everything depended on the next few hours. Victory would resurrect a dying revolution. Defeat would bury it forever in the frozen ground of New Jersey. Washington's gamble was about to be tested against the reality of professional warfare, and the world would never be the same. The attack began at 8 in the morning on December 26th, 1776. Two columns of Continental soldiers emerged from the swirling snow like vengeful spirits, their frozen breath mingling with the smoke of Hessian cooking fires. The professional warriors who had dominated European battlefields for decades were about to face something they had never encountered, an enemy desperate enough to fight in conditions no rational army would endure. The northern approach to Trenton lay exactly as the intelligence agents had reported, unfortified, unguarded. The Hessians had positioned their main defenses along the southern roads, expecting any attack to come from the direction of Philadelphia. They never imagined that Washington would risk everything on a flanking maneuver through the most treacherous terrain available. This miscalculation would cost them dearly. Captain Alexander Hamilton's battery unlimbered their guns at the head of King Street, sending iron death crashing into the heart of the Hessian garrison. The thunder of artillery shattered the morning calm, jolting enemy soldiers from their warm beds into a nightmare of confusion and terror. Professional discipline meant nothing when caught completely off guard. These were the same cannons that had crossed the Delaware on those flat-bottomed boats, now speaking with deadly authority in the narrow streets of Trenton. The Hessian response revealed the chaos that surprise can inflict upon even the most disciplined troops. Officers stumbled from their quarters, shouting contradictory orders in German, while their men scrambled to form defensive lines. Colonel Johann Rahl, the garrison commander, who had dismissed warnings of American activity, found himself trapped in a tactical disaster of his own making. His contempt for colonial fighters had blinded him to the possibility that desperate men might attempt the impossible. Street fighting erupted throughout the town as Continental soldiers pressed their advantage. These were not the same broken men who had retreated across New Jersey weeks earlier. Crossing the Delaware had transformed them, forging their desperation into something harder and more dangerous. They moved through Trenton with the fury of men who understood this might be their last chance to strike back against the forces that had driven them from their homes. The Hessians attempted to deploy their artillery, wheeling cannons into position to sweep the American advance. But Hamilton's guns dominated the high ground, and Continental marksmen picked off enemy gunners with deadly precision. Professional military training proved inadequate when facing an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules of engagement. The Americans fought with the recklessness of men who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. When the smoke cleared, nearly 1,000 Hessian soldiers lay dead, wounded, or captured, while American losses numbered fewer than a dozen men. The professional army that had terrorized the colonies for months had been shattered by farmers and shopkeepers who refused to accept defeat. But the true victory belonged to those nameless intelligence agents who had made it all possible. Their courage in penetrating enemy lines, their precision in gathering vital information, and their ability to remain undetected had provided Washington with the one thing he needed most: hope transformed into opportunity. The Battle of Trenton became the turning point that saved the American Revolution. Yet history remembers the river crossing and the fighting, while the secret intelligence operation that enabled everything remains largely forgotten. Those agents who risked execution to gather crucial information about Hessian defenses never received medals or recognition. Their names were deliberately erased from official records to protect their identities and preserve operational security. This is the essence of intelligence warfare. Success depends on remaining invisible. Sacrifice goes unrecognized, and victory belongs to others. The spies who saved American independence understood this reality and accepted it willingly. They fought their war in shadows so that others could fight theirs in sunlight. Washington's desperate gamble succeeded because ordinary citizens became extraordinary agents, because professional soldiers grew complacent, and because intelligence gathering proved more valuable than conventional military strength. The secret plan that saved the American Revolution was built on courage, timing, and the willingness of anonymous patriots to risk everything for a cause greater than themselves. The frozen ember of liberty that had nearly died in December 1776 was rekindled by information gathered in darkness and delivered at the perfect moment. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with muskets and cannons, but with whispered secrets and careful observation. The revolution survived because someone was watching, someone was listening, and someone was brave enough to carry the truth through enemy lines. This is military, where history's forgotten moments reveal the courage, chaos, and curiosity that shaped our world. Subscribe for more untold military stories that make you go, hmm.